Welcome, everybody. It is 2 o'clock, so we are going to get started. My name is Stacy Matrazzo. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Florida's Carnivorous Plants, Understanding, Identifying, and Cultivating the State's Native Species. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitat through education, research, planting, and conservation. Our work is made possible primarily through the sale and renewal of the Florida State Wildflower License Plate. This is our old look. Here's our newish look. We've had it for a couple of years now. These funds, along with donations and memberships, allow us to support and create projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. Whether you have the old look or the new, you are supporting our programs, and we thank you for that. We'd like to encourage those of you who find our programs valuable to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing the State Wildflower License Plate. And if you purchase or have the license plate, again, old look or the new, you are eligible for a membership with the foundation. Just let us know that you have the tag and we'll get you set up in our database. Be sure to check out our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where to see wildflowers in bloom, upcoming events, and more. We are also on social media. You can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. There's how you find us, about behind on one slide. I will be presenting next month's webinar, a Beginner's Guide to Creating a Native Garden, on Wednesday, October 12th. Join me as I take you through my journey of transforming my lawn, my yard that was once a weedy mess, into a thriving native natural habitat. Of course, we do have some great field trips coming up too. This Saturday, retired environmental journalist Tom Palmer will lead us on a hike through Lake Marion Creek Wildlife Management Area. We hope to see pine lilies and vanilla leaf and other wildflowers that are found in the pine hill and sandhill habitats. There's still time to sign up for that. Just check our website. You can register through the link on our website. Again, be sure to follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to stay abreast of our webinars and field trip opportunities. I have just a couple of housekeeping housekeeping items. Is it Monday? Before we get started, all attendees are muted with cameras off. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature at any point during the presentation. We will feed those questions to our presenter at the end of the presentation as time permits. If your question is not answered, you are welcome to email it to us at info@FLA Wildflowers, and we will be sure to pass that on to our presenter to get you an answer. The chat feature is activated, but please do not put your questions there. We will only be looking in the Q&A for questions. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel and our website in about 24 to 48 hours. When it is available, you will receive an email from us with a link to the recording, along with a resource page with links from the webinar. We'll also include Kenny's contact information. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Kenny Coogan has a master's degree in global sustainability and is passionate about Florida's wildlife and plants. His professional experience with carnivorous plants started 15 years ago when he co-founded the Western New York Carnivorous Plant Club. Since then, he moved to Florida to teach middle school science and agriculture. He was awarded the Best Beginning Science Teacher for the state of Florida and has published over 400 articles on pets, livestock, and gardening for publications including Countryside, Hobby Farms, Chickens, Backyard Poultry, and Florida Gardening magazines. Coogan's an active member of the International Carnivorous Plant Society. He now runs a successful carnivorous plant nursery in Tampa. His latest book, Florida's Carnivorous Plants, is out now. You can order through his website and use the coupon code BOOKS for free shipping. Again, we'll include a link to that in the resources that we send out to you. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let you take over, Kenny.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Stacy. And thank you for your organization for inviting me here today. I'm very excited that you guys are the first webinar where I actually have the physical copy of the book with me. It just came out about 10 days ago. So I'm excited that you guys get to see it. The presentation mirrors the book. Of course, the book goes into more detail, but this will give you a good idea of what the book is about. So for hundreds, probably thousands of years, people have been fascinated by carnivorous plants. And by the end of the presentation, like the subtitle suggests, you'll be able to understand how they eat. You'll be able to identify many of the carnivorous plant species that are native, and you'll be able to grow them in your backyards. So today we're talking about carnivores. We're talking about things with sharp teeth, organisms with toxins, and organisms that have bone cracking strength. But we're not talking about animals. We are talking about carnivorous plants because carnivorous plants have all of those same adaptations. Sadly, there are no carnivorous plants that are large enough to eat a human, despite fiction and musicals. The largest ones can get a couple of feet, the traps, and they can hold about 1 liter of water or digestive enzymes, but they are not found in Florida. All carnivorous plants use their leaves to trap. So no carnivorous plants, there's about 1,000 species around the world, none of them use their flowers. But all carnivorous plants are angiosperms. So they all do flower, but they just don't use their flowers for traps. In the middle and on the right, we have the butterwort and the Venus flytrap, and both of them separate their pollinators from their prey by having their flowers spatially really far apart from the traps. On the left is one of the Saracenia, or one of the pitcher plants that are native to Florida, and they don't eat their pollinators by not opening up their traps at the same time that their flowers are opening. So in the spring, if you visit the Panhandle and some parts of the peninsula, you'll see that the pitcher plants will have these kind of fake pitchers. They're kind of flat, they're sword-like, and then they'll have their flowers, they'll get pollinated, and then once they're done being pollinated, they'll open up their pitchers. And occasionally they eat their own pollinators like bees and wasps. In Florida, Florida's carnivorous plants are going to be eating tiny things like rotifers, little spiders, bees, wasps, things like that. And because I sell carnivorous plants, a lot of times people ask me, which one will eat all of the mosquitoes? And sadly, mosquitoes want blood, and all the carnivorous plants are using nectar to attract their prey. So most carnivorous plants are not interested in a mosquito. If a mosquito happens to fall in, they'll eat it, but they're not really aiming for mosquitoes. So in this presentation, I really wanted to talk about why Florida has so many carnivorous plants. We have the most out of all the other states in the US. In the book, I write about 34 species. One of them is extirpated, which means it's extinct in the state of Florida, but you can find it in some South American countries. And then one of the species in Florida is a non-native. But to answer why we have so many, one of the reasons is because we have nutrient-poor soil. We have a lot of sand, and over millions of years, carnivorous plants have evolved to live in nutrient-poor soils. And another reason why we have so many carnivorous plants is you have to go back to the Pleistocene era, which is the last ice age, about 2.5 million years ago. And the state of Florida, the peninsula, was 3 times wider than it is today. The sea level dropped 300 feet, and that's because there was a lot of ice on the north and the south poles. And as the ice migrated down, it made plants that were able to migrate south survived. And then some plants, of course, had a random adaptation that allowed them to withstand the cold environments. But during this time, there's kind of a mass migration of plants moving down to the southeast. And there's a little band above what Florida is today, and it says warm temperate broadleaf forest. And that means that forest had seasons. And a lot of plants do really well with seasons where there's a dormancy period, there's a resting period, and then there's a nice hot tropical summer. And then the Gulf kind of buffered our temperatures. So it's pretty mild. And if you were a plant, it was a pretty good place to be. To give you an idea of how long ago this was, there was giant ground sloths roaming Tennessee. There were 7-foot, 7-inch tall camels that were in the West. And then there was also smilodons running around. So it was a very long time ago. Then around 10,000 years ago, Florida really was the sweet spot. Florida had a lot of naturally occurring wildfires. And while carnivorous plants don't need fire, they benefit from it. Because when there's a fire, it burns down the taller shrubs and trees. And carnivorous plants can photosynthesize just like any other plant, but they usually need more sun than a non-carnivorous plant because they don't do it as well as a typical plant. So by allowing these wildfires to occur, they get the more sunlight they need. And then Florida's kind of a win-win. The climate's good, the soil's good, and the sunlight's good. So about 10,000 years ago, the ice started retreating. And with that, of about 40 carnivorous plant species that were down here, only a couple of them were able to migrate back up north. So today there's a pitcher plant in the upper peninsula of Michigan. It's on the East Coast in Canada. And then there's several sundews that are up and down the East Coast. But it took these plants about 10,000 years to migrate back up. And only a handful of them out of the 40 were able to do that. So what scientists are concerned about is what happens if the climate changes faster than what it has in the past 10,000 years? Will there be adaptations that allow them to survive? So what happened was Florida was a glacier refuge, and now these plants are kind of stuck in Florida. This allows you to get a good idea of if you're going looking for carnivorous plants in Florida, where to find them. In this picture, this was in Volusia County, and you can see there's a couple of telephone lines here, power lines. And that's a good place to historically find carnivorous plants because mowing mimics what wildfires do. So right now, a lot of people don't want wildfires. There's $1 million houses. So people are trying to suppress the wildfire, but that's not good for carnivorous plants because they needed that extra sunlight. So historically, people mowed these areas, and then these are perennials. They come back every year, and the carnivorous plants can survive in these really, really sunny conditions. Sadly, this exact site is no longer there because instead of mowing, counties, governments have changed from mowing to herbicides, and herbicides do not discriminate, and they're killing carnivorous plants. Another thing that I found interesting while researching the book was that about 300 years ago, when the Franciscan monks came over, they were talking to the indigenous people, and the indigenous Indian tribes said that you could paddle from coast to coast. And the Europeans thought this was very interesting. They noticed that there were plants and animals that were found nowhere else in the world. And when they figured this out, they thought, we should drain the swamp and we should change the ecosystem. And that's because they wanted money. So Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, we all know Broward County, he ran for governorship in 1904, and he won on the motto, water will run downhill, because he wanted to drain Florida and turn it into a Jeffersonian agrarian utopia. So he wanted everyone to be growing sugarcane and tropical crops like that. Frank Stoneman was a writer in he was the editor of the Miami Herald, and he said that yes, Florida is a wasteland. Yes, the Everglades are a wasteland, but it's going to be too much money, too expensive, too much time. We should just leave it as is. Around the same time, 1950, Mayman Jennings was around, and she was the president of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs. And she started looking at surveys that were done in the mid 1800s. And she really pioneered the idea that we really need to be saving wild places for wild plants and wild animals. She was nicknamed the mother of Florida forestry, and she was able to get a couple of state and national parks started. Around the same time, we have Minnie Moore Wilson, and Europeans wanted the Native Americans to either assimilate into European culture, or they just wanted the Native Americans out. So they pushed them into the Everglades, which they thought was a really harsh and inhospitable environment. They moved them to Oklahoma. And Minnie Moore Wilson, she wanted to embrace the Seminole and the Miccosukee tribes because she saw how they were environmentally friendly, they lived sustainably, and she really supported their lifestyle, and she promoted it. A little bit later, in the 1940s and 50s, we get this woman who's at a book signing, and she is quoted as saying, "It is a woman's business to be interested in the environment. It's an extended form of housekeeping." And that is Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And she is more than a school name. In 1947, she published The Everglades, River of Glass, after studying the Everglades for about 10 years. And then a few months later, the Everglades National Park was established. In 1969, when she was 79 years old, she started the Friends of the Everglades because big agriculture and big sugar still wanted to grow crops in the Everglades. They wanted to build an airport. And she fought with them up until she died. And she died around when she was like 108, 109. And that's pretty impressive. As long as you have, a mission in your heart, you can probably live for a very long time. So you might be thinking, why am I talking so much about the Everglades and these women? Well, today the Everglades host 1 out of 3 of the state's carnivorous plant species, including the very endangered Carnivorous Bromeliad. There's only 3 right now that are classified as carnivorous. One of them is in South Florida. And then we have a couple of other endangered carnivorous plants, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And I also wanted to point out that diversity in species and who is in power is a benefit. All right, so now we're going to talk about the different carnivorous plants. And the first one we're going to talk about is the non-native one, but it's the most famous one. It is the Venus flytrap. And usually I talk about carnivorous plants and I refer to them as their scientific name because it could be confusing, if you're traveling, or you can't really say pitcher plant because they're found on many different continents and just be confusing. So, but if you go anywhere and you say Venus flytrap or flytrap, people know what you're talking about. Now, Dionaea muscipula is an interesting scientific name. Dione refers to the name of 4 women in Greek mythology. So it's now translated as like the divine one. And then muscipula means mousetrap. And the real reason why they named it that is because these scientists, all male, of course, looked at this and they thought it resembled a female body part. The way that Venus flytraps work is that on each lobe, there's 2 to 4 trigger hairs. And if you touch one of the trigger hairs, if you just touch one trigger hair, nothing really happens. But if you touch the same trigger hair more than, if you touch it twice within 20 seconds, what causes a calcium action potential wave, and that pushes water to go from the inside of the lobe to the outside. And that causes the trap to shut. And it shuts in about 1/10 of a second, so it shuts very quickly. And if, let's say you're going to feed a Venus flytrap and you put something dead in it, the trap will reopen after about 45 seconds because it thinks like it doesn't think, but it reacts as if like a stick or a piece of dirt fell in it, and it doesn't want to waste its time. Because when it eats something, it takes 4 to 7 days for them to digest their meal. So it's a big investment. So if you're going to hand feed a Venus flytrap, you have to actually put it in there and then you have to wiggle it a little bit, because the more the animal struggles, the more digestive enzymes the Venus flytrap creates. Now I show you these pictures because carnivorous plants have more leaf turnover than non-carnivorous plants. So right here we have 2 healthy Venus flytraps, but there's a lot of black leaves. And that's because Venus flytraps can only digest about 3 meals per trap, and then they turn black and die. So that's one reason why you don't really want to stick your fingers in there and play with them too much. Of course, it's fine if you have a big bug and you put it in there, but they do get tired. And this is true for all carnivorous plants. So as long as you have new growth coming in, your plant is healthy. All right, the next group are the pitcher plants. They're kind of the most charismatic of the group. And in the book, for the native species, which is all of them except for the flytrap, there is distribution maps of what counties you can find them in. The way that the North American pitcher plant works is on the underside of the lid is some nectar. And in the nectar, there's a chemical called conine that makes the bugs drunk. And then they fall in, they slip down, and then they fall into this little well of digestive enzymes. And then it takes them 2 weeks to 2 months to digest their food. If a big organism like a frog or a spider goes in there, they do not get digested. And what usually happens is the frog and the spider steal the food from the pitcher plant. These are the 7 groups of Saracenia that we have in the state of Florida. So we do not have Saracenia alabamenensis, but we do have a subspecies called Warii. And then we don't have Saracenia rubra, but we have a subspecies called gulfensis. These are tall, narrow pitcher plants that get about 18 inches tall. The next one is, we do not have Saracenia flava, but we do have several varieties of Saracenia flava, and flava means yellow, so they have yellow flowers. And these plants can get up to 3 feet in height. And they specialize in wasps, hornets, flies, and bees. And they can be so gluttonous that at the end of the summer, they're so filled with bugs that they tip over. And before this webinar, somebody was mentioning how they noticed that the pictures were just completely filled with love bugs, and they saw like a couple love bugs crawling on the surface because that's how many bugs they ate. Something else that I wanted to point out is if you look at Saracenia flava, this picture on the right, there's a rim of nectar on the top of the lid. So if you're a wasp, you can imagine how appetizing this is. You get a huge landing pad and you get nectar, but that nectar is going to make you a little tipsy, and then you're going to fall in the pitcher. So these are some varieties of flava. On the left, we have ornata, and then on the right, we have rubricopra. And then this one is called cutthroat. It's all green, but it has some red on the back of the throat. Very attractive, and you can see they're growing in full sun. There's some grass, but there really isn't any trees or shade. The next one is Saracenia Leucophylla, which I think that's what the person was talking about, the white top. And you can see they have these beautiful white windows. You can also see on the underside of their lid, there's a bunch of these fine little hairs, and those prevent the insect from backing up. So if, after the bug has had some nectar, they want to maybe leave, so they back up, but those hairs point them downwards and they go farther in. Then light is coming through these areoles. They think it's a window, but it's actually a closed door. They get a little confused, and then they just go deeper and deeper. The next one is Saracenia Minor. This is the only pitcher plant that you can find down into the peninsula. It has the most southern range. And what's interesting about this species is that it was the first pitcher plant ever to be discovered by the Europeans in around 1530. And then in 1887, it was deemed a carnivorous plant. So that means it took it took people about 300 years to figure out that these are carnivorous plants and plants that eat bugs. All right, we have two left. The next one is Saracenia Citicina. Citicina means parrot beak. So they have these pitchers that lie flat on the ground. They have these little hoods that are kind of curved. They look like a parrot beak, and they live in really saturated soils. Some people have seen them floating on little mats of sphagnum moss. And when they live in really wet conditions, when the pitchers flood, tadpoles and mosquito larvae will swim in there, and it works like a lobster pot trap. So it has a tiny opening and it opens up into a bigger space. And with those windows, they get confused. They try to exit in a bunch of different locations, and then they just get deeper into that pitcher. And then at the very end, there's digestive enzymes that break them down. The last Saracenia species that we have is Saracenia Rosea, and it's named that for the pink flowers. And I hope you can see my shirt. I am wearing a Saracenia purpurea shirt. We do not have this species in Florida. About 15 years ago, scientists from Harvard separated Saracenia rosea and Saracenia purpurea. Purpurea has purple flowers, and then rosea has pink flowers. And this one is endemic to Florida, and purpurea is found more north. But Saracenia purpurea is the most studied of all pitcher plants. And what they found was that over 30 species live inside the pitcher. So other pitcher plants have hoods that prevent rainwater from going in, but this pitcher, its hood is all the way back, it's flared back, and it welcomes rainwater in. And protozoa, algae, rotifers, spiders, mosquitoes, caterpillars, and fly larvae lay their eggs inside the pitchers. The babies go through the larval stages, and they can live in this liquid. Most carnivorous plants use their own digestive enzymes, like the stuff that we have in our stomach, but this species uses beneficial bacteria, like we use in our intestines, to help break down its food. So I'm hoping that you agree with me and you're thinking, wow, those were some really sexy Saracenia, and I agree with you. However, that's not exactly what I was thinking about. Here are 3 naturally occurring hybrids that you can find in the state of Florida. And these are all of the naturally occurring hybrids that you can find in Florida and the neighboring states. And to figure out why Saracenia are so sexual, they're so promiscuous, you have to look at their sex organs, which of course are their flowers. So if you cut one of the Saracenia flowers in half, you can see all of the different parts, and they're pollinated by bees and honeybees and bumblebees. And if you're an insect that's going to pollinate them, you're going to fly up and under the sepals that hang, and you're going to go over this part, and you're going to go over that part, and then you're going to walk around this upside down umbrella. And when you do that, you're going to be drinking nectar, but you're also going to be grabbing that pollen that has been caught by that upside down umbrella. And when you're about to leave, you're going to look for an exit, and the only exit are 4 or 5 tiny little holes that are caused by the petals. And when you visit the next flower, and that could be, a foot away, and that could be a different species, or it could be 50 feet or 100 feet away, and that could certainly be a different species. You're going to repeat the process. But when you do that, when you go up and under those sepals, you're going to be scraping the pollen off of this part, which is the stigma, which is where fertilization occurs. And that is how insects cause naturally occurring hybrids. And that is how you can create your own hybrids at home if you're growing these plants. At the end of each chapter in the book, I have commonly cared for carnivores. So I list and I have photos of species and hybrids that you can find in cultivation that you might want to add to your backyard. The next group of carnivorous plants that we're going to be talking about are Utricularia, and that scientific name means wine flask, leather bottle, or bagpipe. So you're probably thinking, wow, this is going to be a pretty cool looking plant. And you're right, it looks like this. It kind of looks like pond scum, but when you look at it closely, you can see that it has these beautiful traps. They kind of are like off of roots, but these are just modified leaves, just like the other carnivorous plants. And this photo was taken with a camera. It's not with a microscope. Some of them are the size of like the period at the end of a sentence, and some of them are the size of a BB gun pellet. So they're pretty small. At the opening of the mouth of the bladderwort, there are some trigger hairs, and these hairs give off some scents that lure their prey in. And in the world, there's over 200 species. Some of them are aquatic, some of them are epiphytic, and some of them are terrestrial. We have aquatic and terrestrial. We do not have any of the epiphytic species. They eat protozoans, rotifers, little microscopic things, and they get sucked in like a vacuum. Now, as a longtime vegetarian, I think this is really fascinating. If they eat a small tadpole or a mosquito larvae that's bigger than the trap, what they do is they will just eat a little bit by bit. So the trap opens, in a millisecond, and then they will digest that part in about 20 minutes to a couple of hours, and then they'll just snack on it bit by bit. All right. So here we have some floating Utricularia. The way that you can identify them is usually by the flowers, and because they don't flower all the time, it's a little tricky. In the book, I have a 2-page spread of how you can identify them. Most of them have yellow flowers. The next group of carnivorous plants that we're going to be talking about are the butterworts, and butterworts are really cool because they look like a pile of tongues. There are some species that you can find throughout the entire state. There's a couple that are only found in the Panhandle. And the way that they work is their entire leaf is sticky. So on the surface, they have these little mucilaginous glands. And when like a fruit fly or a fungus gnat lands on them, they will get stuck. And then after a couple of hours, they suffocate. And then through the leaf, they get dissolved. And a lot of people are surprised by that, but non-carnivorous plants can also get nutrients through their leaves. That's when you foliar feed them or when you foliar fertilize them. So it's not too big of a leap to do that. All right, guys, I have good faith that the PowerPoint's going to work now. The next group that we're going to talk about are the sundews. And we have 5 different species of sundews in the state of Florida. We have a couple that are only found in the Panhandle. And again, we have several that are found in the peninsula. We have 2 species that are pretty tiny. They're red, and they, the only difference is that one of them has a glandular stalk. And then the next one is called intermedia. It lives in saturated soils, but it can also live in like flooded areas. And then we have Drosera filiformis, which is a threadleaf sundew. And then we have Triceratraceae, which is also threadleaf, but it's the largest species, and it can get up to 20 inches. And that's what's on the cover of the book. And they unfurl. So when they grab a hold of prey, they do not curl up. Some species do. There's over 200 species of sundews, but the Florida ones don't move too much. They also eat tiny things like fruit flies and fungus gnats.
Kenny, excuse me. I don't know if you are still working on the PowerPoint, but we're not seeing any slides.
I am still working on the
Okay,
PowerPoint. It's
just making
frozen.
sure. Just
Yeah.
making sure.
Sorry about that.
It happens.
There's really not much I can do right now, other than keep talking. And then the last group of carnivorous plants, and once the PowerPoint works, I would love to show you all of these pictures. The last group is the Carnivorous Bromeliad. And I did see somebody's question about the Florida Keys. And it says, so there are no carnivorous plants on the Florida Keys. And that is pretty true. The Carnivorous Bromeliad is pretty much only in the Everglades. And it's highly endangered. The cool thing about the Carnivorous Bromeliad is that it's only one of 3 species of bromeliads that's carnivorous. And one difference is that these bromeliads like to grow in full sun. So where you would find them is on the edge of a tree without any canopy above them. And another thing that makes them a little different is that they have a white powder on their leaves, which I know other bromeliads also have. But these carnivorous bromeliads have the powder that prevents insects from seeing UV light, and that causes insects to crash into their leaves more often than non-carnivorous bromeliads, and then they fall into the well, and then bacteria helps break them down. All right. So the last section that I wanted to talk about, well, there's 2 more sections. One is conservation, and then the other one is cultivation. So I'll talk about conservation first. So in the world, there's about 250,000 angiosperms. There's around 250 named flowering plants. Of those, the International Union of Conservation of Nature, who's responsible for identifying plants and animals as least concern, endangered, threatened, near extinct, they've only looked at 3% of the 250,000 named plants. And of the 3% that they looked at, they have decided that 70% of all of those plants are either endangered or threatened. So that's not a very good track record. And what's worse for carnivorous plants is that they are disproportionately endangered and threatened. So the one reason is that carnivorous plants need really pristine environments. So I mentioned earlier that herbicides are a problem, and a lot of master gardeners who attend this talk are quick to point out that big agriculture, of course, uses pesticides and herbicides, but the backyard grower, the backyard gardener, is much more likely to not follow the rules and regulations when applying these herbicides and insecticides. And a professor from USF has deemed that insecticides below, above, or within the use that's on the bottle can still be detrimental to carnivorous plants. So if you're going to be spraying anything and then those bugs go into a carnivorous plant, it could be not great for the carnivorous plants. So that's something to keep in mind. Another problem that carnivorous plants experience is the eutrophication, which is when there's extra nutrients and fertilizers in the water, because all of them have evolved to live in nutrient-poor soils and waterways. So bladderworts especially don't do great with areas where there's a lot of agriculture runoff, or even the carbon dioxide from the cars that gets picked up by the drains. All right, I don't want to jinx it, but the PowerPoint may work now. So Aldo Leopold, he was a famous conservationist from the 1940s, 1950s, and he is quoted as saying, there are some who can live without wild things and some who cannot. But now we know that we all need wild places and wild things to live. Where carnivorous plants live, not just in the panhandle, but everywhere, are really clean environments, and we need to protect them, because when we protect them, they protect us. So the wetlands are kind of like the kidneys, and they help clean air, they help clean water, they help clean the soil. And when we protect them, we can protect these wild flowers. Here are some of the bladderworts that they're in full bloom. When they're in mass, they're beautiful. Right now, I'm in Central Florida. This is a bladderwort. Bladderwort is called purpurea. And right now they are in flower, in Central Florida at least. And just because we missed it, I'll just show you all my beautiful photos that are in the book. So these are the butterworts. These two species are found in drier conditions. These two species are getting a little wetter. And then Pinguicula planifolia is in the panhandle. This is the only butterwort that can be all the way red, and they're found in really wet conditions. And when they're submerged in water like this, they can still trap and digest microscopic organisms. The last one for the pinguiculas, which means the greasy ones or the buttery ones, is Cremuloflora. And this is pretty much the only one that you can find in cultivation. It's pretty easy to grow. And what's exciting about it is at the tip of each of the leaves, they produce 3 or 4 pups. So very frequently, every couple of months, you'll get a bunch of little babies growing on the tip of that leaf, and you can gently pull them off and start a new colony. This is my favorite photo in the book. And a common name for this pinguicula is the clear water stream pinguicula or butterwort. And that's because they're typically found in clear water streams on these little mud islands. You can see that's a pretty big leaf, maybe 5-6 inches. And the International Carnivorous Plant Society has a photo contest that you can enter for free every year. The photo contest is January through April, and then the winners are announced in May. And the winner of this year basically won with this photo with the same species in a river, but they took the photo in Texas. All right, so the sundews that I mentioned, these are the tiny little red guys, brevifolia and capillaris. We can consider them short-lived perennials. They might live more than one season, but they frequently flower and they have lots and lots of seeds. This is the intermedia that can live in really saturated soils. These two are more decumbent, they're laying horizontally. This one is more upright. And then the filiformis variety Floridiana is very red and orange. It's about 12 inches. And then the biggest one is Tracea, which is that big solid green one. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the only carnivorous plant, the only carnivorous bromeliad in Florida is this Ketopsis. And you can see it's pretty upright. If you happen to get one, it's probably because they're found in Cuba and South America. It's probably not going to be the one that's genetically from Florida. It's probably going to be the one from Cuba or some South American country. And the way you know that you're growing it correctly is that it should be a very tight cylinder. If it's really like floppy and leggy, it means it needs more sunlight. All right, we talked about the conservation. We talked about Aldo Leopold. We talked about these beautiful sites. All right, so hopefully you're inspired to help save these carnivorous plants. And I know you already want to save flowering plants, and these are flowering plants. So here are some ways you can help. One way is you can educate others about the value of wild habitats. So I host a weekly radio show on WMNF 88.5 Tampa. The show is called Sustainable Living. Every Monday we have guests, we have experts on. And a couple of months ago, we had a couple of Eckerd college professors come on and they talked about microplastics. And I asked them, what is the takeaway? What can listeners do? And my co-host said, well, we can stop using plastic. But then the experts said, it's better for you to tell 10 other people why microplastics are bad, so they stop using microplastics or plastics in general, because that's how you get a movement started and going, right? If you stop using plastic, that's pretty good. But if you tell 10 people and they stop using it, and then they tell 10 people and they stop using it, that's how you can get things going. So if you tell people about carnivorous plants, they're really cool. They've been around for millions of years, but in Florida and in other parts of the world, they're endangered, they're threatened due to habitat loss, due to pollution, then maybe people will start helping to save them. Another thing you could do is join and support the North American Saracenia Conservancy. They buy up large patches of wild places to help the Saracenia. And earlier, before the webinar, we were talking about, somebody mentioned TNC, the Nature Conservancy. And if you join the International Carnivorous Plant Society, you can donate to our conservation efforts or our education efforts. And we donate to the Nature Conservancy to save places where carnivorous plants grow in many different states, including Florida. We also host webinars once a month. And maybe a month or two ago, we had a scientist from Texas, and they said that 95% of all the Saracenia that are growing in Texas are on private land. So if we want to save these plants, even if you think about Florida, if you want to save these plants, we have to educate the landowners. And then the last thing that you can help carnivorous plants is by planting native plants in your yard. So that's what the last section is going to be, on how to grow Florida's carnivorous plants. And it's pretty easy. The first thing is that they need specific water. And the water needs to be reverse osmosis water. So you have to buy a big system. It's pretty expensive. Or they need distilled water, or they need rainwater. So I have about 3,000 carnivorous plants. I have 6 50-gallon rain barrels, and I just use rainwater for the entire year. And those 6 50-gallon rain barrels last me through that. So carnivorous plants need very pure, very clean water. Well water and city water will kill them pretty quickly. The other thing about growing Florida's carnivorous plants is they need to be wet during the growing season. So March through October, they need to be sitting in a 1/4 inch to an 1/8 inch of water all the time. So on the picture on the right, there's a little tray, and it's called a 10-20 tray. You could put them in a little kiddie pool. They just, you can put them on a shelf. They just need to be wet all the time. Here are some pictures that are from the book. If you have a pond with or without fish, you can grow carnivorous plants there as long as it's very, very sunny. You can put them on shelf. You can put them on little floating devices in the water. Or if you have like a really cool claw-footed tub, or if you have like a nice kiddie pool, you can create a little bog. Or if you have some pond liner, you can create a bog. One pitcher plant will look nice, but if you put a bunch of them together, or if you mix and match them with Sundews and Venus flytraps, they look really great. And they all need the same conditions, so you can grow them together. All right, traditionally speaking, we have grown carnivorous plants in half peat and half perlite, which is this volcanic rock in the middle, or we have grown them in like half sphagnum and half peat, or half sphagnum and half perlite. The problem with peat is that it's not really sustainable. It takes tens of thousands of years for sphagnum moss to break down, decay, and turn into peat moss. So during the pandemic, there's been a lot of experiments, and I have been switching over to coconut coir and coconut chips. So lots of countries in Africa and Asia grow coconuts, and we drink the coconut milk and we eat the coconut meat. But then they are left with a byproduct. And for a while, reptile people have been using ground up coconut husks and chips for the bedding of their reptiles, but we can also use it for carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants need a soil substrate that has no fertilizers, no additives, no things that retain moisture. It needs to be pretty pure. So in the wild, they grow in peat and sphagnum, so that's why people were replicating that. But to be a little more sustainable, you can mix in some triple washed coconut coir or coconut husks. There's another product called pit moss. It's from post-consumer materials like cardboard and newspaper, and it's kind of like guinea pig bedding. You can mix that with some peat and perlite if you don't want to just use peat. All right, for Florida's carnivorous plants, they want full sun. They want 8 hours of sun, like a vegetable garden. If you, if you have more than 8 hours, the more the better. The more sun, the more colorful they are, the bigger they are, the happier. These are not native to Florida, but you can find these sometimes at plant sales. And this is kind of what I specialize in. They're called Nepenthes. These are pitcher plants. They turn into 6 to 12 foot long vines where they have part of their leaf hang down and it forms a little cup. These are not native to Florida. They're from the Southeast, most Southeast Asian countries, and there's a couple species in Australia and Madagascar. These are similar to the other carnivorous plants with the growing medium, except they do not want full sun. They want some shade. All right. Thank you for bearing with my technical difficulties. And like Stacy said, you can order your signed copy today on my website. And I really appreciate you guys coming. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny. Appreciate you giving us so much good information today. I do have a question. We had a couple questions emailed, and then I see one in the Q&A as well. From the Q&A, Alan says he's having difficulty finding the bagged long fiber sphagnum moss. Where do you get yours?
That is a good point. Since the pandemic, the long fiber sphagnum moss, which can be grown within a growing season, so it is sustainable. It's because of the pandemic, the stuff that was coming from Canada and New Zealand and South America was kind of stuck at the ports for a couple of years. So I order it wholesale in bulk from Supermoss. You can order it retail from Supermoss, but that's probably one of the only places currently. Historically, you've been able to find it at like a big box store, but right now it's very hard to come by. So Supermoss, I know they have some small bales available now.
Thank you. With so many of the species you're talking about being endangered or threatened, when you talk about growing them in your landscape or growing them in pots in your yard, how do you, where do you get them from? How do you know that you're getting plants that are not harvested improperly?
Good question. So in the book, I think I have at least a whole page about how to identify if like a plant is poached or not. Usually for carnivorous plants, if they're poached, they probably wouldn't even make it to resale. They're just going to die when they're being dug up. So one way to make sure that they're not being poached is you can like look at the soil. You can look at the nurseryman's entire set. If they have a dozen or 6 dozen of one plant, they're not going to be poached. They're going to be bred. I actually don't. So I have a lot of sundews that are native, and I have one species of butterwort that is native. And the sundews, you can grow probably 50 seedlings from a single plant because they're such prolific seeders. The one species of pinguicula is tissue cultured. So I buy them as like little plugs. and they're just mass produced. And then for the Saracenia, I don't usually carry the species or the subspecies that are truly native to Florida, but a lot of those naturally occurring hybrids are mass produced through tissue culture, and even non-carnivorous nurseries sell them.
And someone's asking if you sell Pinguicula primuliflora.
Yes, I do.
You do? Okay.
That's the one species that I usually have. Right now, I only have 9 left, though.
And do they, this is my question, do they do well in containers outside of their natural range?
Yes, they do. So, yeah, I think the real reason they haven't like migrated or, inhabited a lot of Florida is just from development.
Okay. One more question. Can Nepenthes grow in the Coco Coir mix?
Yes, definitely. That the Nepenthes, I've been doing like 60 or 70% cocoa mix, and then maybe 20% perlite, and maybe like 10%, 20% long fiber sphagnum.
Okay, and we will be including this in our resources we send out, but if you'd like to let everyone know what your website or your retail store is, we have a question there.
So my website is very easy. It's kennycoogan.com. I do not have a lot of things listed on the shop right now because starting this Saturday, it's like the peak of fall plant sales. So every weekend from now through November, I'm going to be in Central Florida every Saturday and Sunday at a plant sale. So I pretty much removed everything from my website. But if you go to the website or my social media, you can just message me and I can let you know what I have.
And where to find you on any given Saturday?
And if you go to Instagram or Facebook, you can go and I have all of the events listed. Yes. One thing I didn't mention is that Saracenia and the Venus flytraps and a few of the sundews go dormant in the winter. I think we mentioned that right before the webinar. So they die back or they don't grow much from Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day. So if you get a Florida native plant now and it dies back a lot in the winter, do not throw it away. They are all, except for a couple of the sundews, they're all perennials. Venus flytraps and pitcher plants should live 15 to 20 years. Both of them grow with a rhizome. And once you get a little brave in the winter, you can just start breaking those rhizomes apart and starting new pots. And then you'll have a little colony of carnivorous plants.
So that may have answered the last question we have, but they're asking if they can survive the winter climate. What's too cold for a carnivorous plant?
So Venus flytraps are native to the Carolinas. They can handle down to, if the temperature is slowly decreasing, Venus flytrap and a lot of the Saracenia, they can go down to 20 degrees, 15 degrees. But if they're actively growing and then there's a cold snap, like it freezes, they might not be too happy. But if the weather just slowly goes down, they're fine. And a lot of the Saracenia species and the Venus flytraps, they actually benefit from a little winter dormancy. If they don't get it every 5 or so years, you'll notice that their leaves and the vigor kind of is lacking. And that's when I make a lot of divisions, or if you're really dedicated, you can take them out of their pots, get rid of all of the soil, and you can spray some fungicide on the rhizome. And then you can put the rhizomes in a little Ziploc bag, put it in your fridge, like your vegetable, fruit drawer, just like a tulip or, some other bulb that we're not really supposed to be growing in Florida. And then do that from Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day, and then they'll have a little more vigor.
Great. We just got one last comment that someone is from Atlanta, Georgia, and theirs have survived temperatures as low as 10 degrees. So not surprising if they make it all the way up to the Carolinas and beyond.
Yeah, so that's the fly trap, but there's several species of sundews.
Yeah.
When I went to Iceland, I saw tons of butterworts all over Iceland. So yeah,
Wow.
lots of species that can tolerate a wide variety of climates.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing this information with everyone. I look forward to getting a copy of your book myself, because this is really, they're just such fascinating plants. We will, again, include that information in the resources that we'll send out in the next 24 to 48 hours. So thank you, Kenny. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you like the programming that we are putting out, please consider joining our organization, supporting us with a donation, a membership, or a license tag purchase. Yeah, thank you so much, Kenny.
Thank you, Stacy. Bye, everyone.
Take care.